Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. So I'm Matt Starnes. I'm the Zoom Account Director for UK Government, looking after all the government organisations in the UK, including devolved administrations, and responsible for the entire Zoom platform for those customers. Also joined today by Drew Smith from our Government Affairs team. So over to you, Drew.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this presentation on the era of flexibility. And it's a real pleasure of ours to be presenting to Smarter Working Live today. Matt and I have introduced ourselves already, but here's two photos of us, just in case you couldn't see us on the screen. And what we're going to be talking to you today is what the era of flexibility is, what it means for public service delivery, and how you and your organisations can set yourself up for success. I'm going to take those first three bits, and then Matt's going to really dive in on the technical piece and talk about Zoom, how we use today and how we can help you. But just to really kick things off, I'm going to show you a very quick video that I think tells the story of how we've moved as a company, Zoom, from being that video conferencing tool that you'll all know and hopefully love into a full service unified communications platform that today is really powering the kind of more hybrid and flexible workforces that we're here today to have a discussion about. So a short video.
While many businesses are eager to welcome their employees back to the office, others aren't in the same rush. And that's okay. Today's workplace needs have evolved. And business leaders are rethinking how they can support their distributed workforce. At Zoom, we're committed to helping businesses get the most out of their unique workspaces. So if your employees are on-site, remote, or a mix of both, Zoom can help you and your team stay safe and efficient. We have the products and features you need to optimize your space and fully enable the hybrid workforce. Whether you need to be in the office, out in the field, or in your own workspace, connect, share ideas, and get more done together, wherever you are.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, and thank you for bearing with us, sharing slightly Americanized, video to kick things off. But I think it really, particularly for the local government audience amongst us today, paints a picture of how the Zoom platform and the Zoom technology can be used in some quite, progressive and thoughtful new ways. That those images of that man in the yellow vest, high vis, out in the field, but while engaging with his team in another place, I really think exemplifies that. And the business, the video rather talks of businesses, but it really should talk about organizations. At Zoom, we've got more than 500,000 Zoom customers now, and we work with thousands of non-profits, government entities, local governments all around the world. And we're really proud to have some big flagship relationships with people like the NHS, in the US, the Department of Defense and the White House, many EU institutions, healthcare organizations around the world, and as I mentioned, public services too. And at Zoom, we're really proud of the role we played during the pandemic, keeping public services going in many cases, and also the economy and businesses of all sizes. We'll talk a little bit today about our role in that kind of really unique and exciting and daunting time, but also mostly use that as a springboard to talk about the future. We've grown enormously as a company during the last couple of years. Much of that growth was driven by the pandemic and the response to the pandemic, but which really was a miracle of technology. But where it's left us today is with lots of lessons, lots of learnings, and lots of new features. And as we all come together to think about how we work in different ways, how we buy and how we interact with services in different ways. So that sets the scene, hopefully, for what we want to talk to you today, which is the era of flexibility we find ourselves in today in 2023. And that experience during the pandemic was one that impacted us all as individuals, but also as customers. And I think that really matters for many of your end users as well. Your customers, your clients, your employees, they're all looking for something different today. And that's just as true in public service delivery as in any other part of the economy. I really love this slide. It will be familiar, a Google Trends search will be familiar to many on today's webinar. But what it details is the relative use of the term virtual appointment in Google search, with a range of 0 to 100 and comparative usage over time. And the reason I love this slide is it's a great reminder that the concept of virtual appointments, which is what the search term is for, even up until the pandemic started, was really quite unusual. It started in 2017. We're not going back to the turn of the millennium or anything like that. Even in 2017, 2018, and beginning of 2019, the idea of virtual appointments were quite unusual. But for reasons that don't need much expounding, they became essential. They became highly convenient, and post lockdowns and pandemics, etc., they continue to be what people want and need in many cases. And we see that sort of consistent level of interest just via that kind of rudimentary barometer that is a Google Trends search. And as I mentioned, our customers have changed, your customers have changed, and so have your employees. And one of the first things we're going to talk about today is about how employees all around the world in all sorts of markets and all sorts of contexts have taken their experience of different styles of working forced on them, and are now demanding more agency in their work style and how they set themselves up. And it would be remiss of me to not quickly mention, I'm sure everybody here today has seen the fascinating insights from the 4-day a week trial, where 56 of the 61 companies said that they were going to keep going with a 4-day week, and that it was good for productivity, and that lots of other benefits to their organizations. And I think that really sums up, was a really great example of how we have entered this era of flexibility. So I'm going to break that down into 3 sections today, and what this era of flexibility means for your employees, for your customers, and then in terms of your digital transformation plans as well, which I know is a big focus for this audience. And in terms of the employee experience, we'll go into it a bit in each, but just quickly, I think what we're talking about here is, how do we build on the experiments that were forced on people during the pandemic that I mentioned, and now that the genie is really out of the bottle on flexible working or hybrid working. And of course, remember that hybrid working is anything from spending 1 day not in the office per month through to spending 1 day in the office per month. It can mean lots of different things in different contexts, but it just essentially means doing your work not always from a defined place, really, and there's a huge amount of bandwidth in that. Most large institutions now are looking at their buildings and their real estate costs, and whether they need to have the same physical infrastructure that they did. Again, that cost piece we'll touch on, and I know is really interesting to this audience too, and the potential savings. The second piece is around customers and innovation in customer services, which has been driven by these changing expectations, and also by competition as well as technology. The emergence of more remote-only, high-touch customer interactions, and there's also a role for AI increasingly in those, are proving to be really fascinating as new ways of doing things, new ways of receiving services are emerging at pace and all of the time. And just to give one example, just a few years ago, if you think back to that Google Trends slide, the idea of doing a remote document signing, take your sort of DocuSign, another software company, that has now become the industry standard in just a couple of years. And who on this webinar today would have thought that would have had experience of doing a remote onboarding as a new hire, or delivering that for new hires? Not many a few years ago. Now very, very much the norm. And then thirdly, on digital transformation, this is happening in public services, but it's also happening across the economy. Video banking is so different to people's experience of queuing in branches. Hospitals now, and we're very proud to be working with many hospitals in the UK and further afield, are thinking about how video-routed triage services can reduce pressure on in hospital services and educators. Zoom played an enormous role during the pandemic, keeping education going in more than 100 countries. But now, as we move into this new normal, what does learning in a kind of technology-enabled world look like? And how can we expand the reach of learning experiences? Very, very exciting and part of this kind of new phase of transformation. And so ultimately, with that employee expectation that we talked about having changed, I think the customer expectations have also changed, and they're demanding even better experiences. And for those of you involved in citizens-facing public services, we'll come into a bit more about what that means shortly. So on to the employee in a bit more detail. And it's the key thing here really is that the expectations of your employees that you have now and also your future employees have really, really changed. And those shifting expectations are here to stay. That's been evidenced in study after study, research report after research report, and consumer polling too. There has been an enormous amount of noise in the media about the future of work over the last 3 years. Some of it driven by media outlets that have their own agendas, but really it boils down to three things. Firstly, the vast majority of organisations have now settled into some form of hybrid. I'm sure that's true for many of you. Work of Nicholas Bloom at Stanford, who's the leading sort of academic thinker and has been surveying businesses for more than 20 years on flexible working, has found that the UK has settled into an average of about 2 days per week per employee working remotely. And at a European, which is slightly above most other countries, the UK has settled into an average that's slightly more than those other countries, but all of those countries have got hybrid working to some degree or other. And across Europe, we did a piece of work with a major research outfit called IDC that found that 93% of employees are now saying that having some degree of flexible working is an essential part of their experience. And when anything is 93%, I think that really underlines just quite how those expectations I mentioned have changed and changed dramatically. The second thing then is that employers and organisations that employ people that fail to recognise these changes and that fail to adapt to this new world of work, to this new era of flexibility and these new employee expectations, especially in today's tight labour market, are not going to be able to attract and crucially retain the talent that they need to thrive right now, and particularly to grow, if indeed that is their plans. But it's not just a transactional, you must have flexible in order to be successful from a retention and a recruitment perspective. There's enormous opportunities. I mentioned 4-day working weeks. Zoom doesn't have a position on that, but it just speaks to the wider kind of awareness and thoughtfulness that's going into workplace design, workforce setups, conversations now around part-time work, late and early time, output-based contracts are much more elevated and part of the conversation than they were just a few years ago, and really, again, speaks to that era of flexibility that we're in, and it's opportunities for employers like yours that are looking to create more diversity-friendly workforces to retain that, perhaps that senior and very experienced worker that it says that they want something a bit different in order to stay working. Perhaps that the lack of flexibility might be what's driving them to persuade them to take early retirement. These new models, these new ideas of flexibility, there's lots and lots of opportunities within them that meet the shifting employee expectations. A couple of statistics, I'll leave them up on the screen, but I'll speak to the third one, which is that one study last year found that more than half, 51% of UK employees would consider leaving their company or their organisation if their hybrid working style was removed, and that is an enormous operational risk for employers, particularly, as I say, in this tight labour market where actually pay isn't the primary driver of decision making anymore. There was separate studies that found that employees regard having flexible working arrangements as worth about an equivalent of a 6% pay cut. So they're just as happy, they are just as content of you giving them the flexibility that they crave as a 6% pay rise. They feel about the same. I'm not saying that that's what you should do as organisations, but it's how they if asked to choose between the two, it was worth about a 6% increase in pay, and taking it away would give more than a majority of people pause for thought about whether or not they wanted to stay with their employer. What does this mean for your customers? And this really builds on the slide I showed you earlier about virtual appointments. And I deliberately mentioned changing customer behaviour first, because it's very easy to get drawn into the discussion I just touched on with employees, which is often part of the discourse and that media conversation that we're all very familiar with. So it's easy to miss that customer expectations have really changed too. Speaking from personal experience, I often, not because I'm special, I think I'm quite representative, have got better things to do than to physically go into a shop to buy something that I need but don't really get any joy out of purchasing. Equally, the vast majority of younger people, but I'm sure it's true in all segments, that they're no longer prepared to have to take half a day off work, losing out on valuable holiday or valuable pay to go to an in-person appointment delivered by the public sector, perhaps by their local council, perhaps by some other public sector body, for an appointment that could have been done remotely on Zoom. They're just not prepared. And of course, other video capabilities are available, but they're just not prepared to do that in the same way that they were before, when they could perhaps squeeze that appointment in around their other work commitment without their boss knowing. And the same is true for being held on the customer expectations around being held on the line for to wait to speak to a person on the phone for hours on end. This is very much not where our customers are anymore, and we're working with many companies, which Matt will speak to later, about how they redesign their customer facing to you about our brand new virtual agent, which is a sort of chatbot that we can build into our customer facing services. These powered by AI are increasingly part of the full suite of services that customer facing organizations need to have to deliver better customer services. I mentioned digital transformation in banking earlier on. Very recently, I had a problem with a check that I needed to put into my bank. It was rejected on online banking. I thought to myself, right, here we go. I'm going to have to take an hour off work to drive to my local town, queue up, pay for parking, pay for petrol, all over my lunchtime probably, which means perhaps the tellers will be on their lunch as well, all just to query this check. And in the end, it was a chatbot on my bank account that managed to resolve it while I was still sat at my desk, not holding onto a phone, just a chatbot. And while I was also doing my work emails, the whole thing was resolved in 20 minutes. And I tell you about that today because that customer experience, although perhaps trivial, compared to the 2 hours I thought it was going to cost me, which I would have had to make up that evening, doing my work into my evening, that customer experience delighted me and had a real impact on my day and my productivity. And it's for those of you here that are responsible for public services that are touching, your citizens daily, hundreds perhaps of interactions daily, these things really, really matter. And then finally, and also it pays off. And we found with our partnership with IDC that those organizations that have made investments in different work styles and work transformation broadly, they're reporting about a 30% improvement on average in customer satisfaction. So organizations that are making investments that might actually save them money in terms of technology and maybe in terms of their real estate costs are also finding that this is leading to better customer outcomes and higher customer satisfaction, which it really is remarkable. Finally, digital transformation and beneath that, the adoption of new technologies like Zoom, like DocuSign, like any other software, many other types of software that we are a major factor in public services today and what they mean for productivity. What we saw in the pandemic was a huge bringing forward of investment in hardware, in software in the UK. McKinsey said that about 85% of UK employers of all types brought forward investment in 2020. And I'm sure this is familiar to many people here today. Buying new tools, buying new hardware to enable their workforces to continue and to be productive in that kind of strange lockdown world of 2020 and 2021. that investment was brought forward to such a great extent that 2021 was the year that the UK's productivity grew the most in the last 10 years. And it also drove an enormous amount of familiarity amongst our end users, amongst our staff, amongst your staff, in doing things differently, being forced to be flexible, being forced to use new tools to have greater output, and to rely on digital tools to do more in that time. And as I said, there was a huge amount of investment brought forward. We're benefiting from that today. And the UK has a huge competitive advantage here because we saw a much bigger digital adoption than other countries, comparable countries, just in terms of video conferencing, which obviously is core to Zoom. The share of organisations using video conferencing and digital tools to do their work during the pandemic more than quadrupled in the UK, and we saw about 82% of organisations. Now that compares to 62% of organisations in Germany, 58% in Japan. And this digital adoption that the UK has really led on, and has happened to a greater degree in the UK than elsewhere, really matters for your workforces and what they're ready for and what they're looking for, but also for their productivity. Because survey after survey shows that employees that have some degree of flexibility, not only do they really want it, as we've talked to earlier, but they are more productive. And I'm not going to quote some studies to you now about employee responses, because you might think, well, they would say that employees would say that they're more productive, they like working from home. Actually, the CIPD, the Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development, the leading management organisation in the UK, found that by more than twice the number of employers found that embracing flexible working arrangements had increased their employee productivity. So more than twice the number said that it had than said that it hadn't. And this final data point, I think, really speaks to that across Europe, where 91% of European companies are saying that their employees are more productive if they've made those investments in work transformations and brought in new technologies and new ways of working that enables their employees to have that trust, to have that flexibility, and ultimately the productivity gains are there for all to see and for you to realise if that's something you're thinking about in the year ahead. So lastly from me, what does this mean for us? As we settle into this new normal and think about work transformation this year in 2023, it is easy to lose sight of just quite how seismic some of the changes we are living through have been and continue to be. The changing nature of work we've talked about, citizens' expectations about public services we've talked about. These are huge recalibrations in our worlds, in the kind of priorities of everybody here today, and of course the budgetary pressures. I don't need to expand on, but is a really real consideration that we are all living through at the moment. And so navigating those things and thinking about how do we take some of the things Drew's talked about today and take them back to our organisation to set ourselves up for success. Well, it can be daunting, of course, and that is just as true in the public sector as anywhere else. But thankfully, the guidelines are becoming clearer. And so just a few thoughts on how to approach this from this is Zoom's kind of view, but we are very privileged to be working with such an enormous amount of organisations as they grapple with this, because they come to us and say, we're thinking about these things. How can your technology help us? So the first guideline would be, think about technology, think about your physical environments, and make sure that they are conducive to your staff having choices. This is just absolutely key. You want to make sure that your office and your technology empower your workers and your teams to have choice and to feel trusted. But of course, parameters for the most part will be needed, but don't make up rules. The second thing what we would say is don't just have rules for rules' sake. Think about how you can create environments for your teams where outcomes are key and where you've really demonstrated that what you need from them and why you're making business decisions that impact them and their ways of working. in a way that also balances the need for them to have agency. Some of our major customers in the enterprise world that have thousands of staff, this means they're doing very different things at different team levels in terms of how they design their workforce, what the requirements on being in the office are. It depends on often by a division or a team basis, and that feedback that they've received when crafting the rules from their teams has been absolutely essential. So just to reiterate, don't just have rules for rules' sake. Think about what works for individual teams and for individual parts of your organization. And then thirdly, obviously, there is a balance to be struck between the needs of your organization and sometimes individuals. And so if activities are essential for your organization or for your team, make clear to the individual why that is the case. And have that clarity. Don't just assume that they'll understand that that you're asking them to come in on this certain day. Really spell out why that is essential for the team or for the organization as a whole. You might want to have incentives, whether that's nibbles, whether that's drinks, or whether it's actually having reason to be in the office to hear from leadership in person or external speakers. It's all about creating purposeful interactions. We like to talk about offices as magnets and not mandates. And then we talked about flexibility, so I won't jump on that too much. And last slide from me. These are the three principles that we at Zoom have really threaded through how we've thought about setting ourselves up for success in this new era. Clearly, I'm not talking to you from an office today, but when we've asked our employees how they want to work and how they want to interact with the company, we've thought about purpose and creating meaningful interactions so that when we are together, it really delivers value for us as an organization and for the individual. Our core value of care is the second thing, and that's what we'd like to say is a multi-directional thing. So we should expect care from all of our employees, but also the employees in this day and age also expect that their employer thinks about their needs and how they impact the community that they're in. And then finally, flexibility. Does it really matter that one of your team has 3 to 4 o'clock blocked out every day in the office in their diary because they want to do the school run and then makes up an hour in the evening after the kids have gone to bed? At Zoom, we found that tends to have a net positive effect because that means the world to that person to be able to do that. And that might be the difference between you being able to keep a valued employee and them looking for work elsewhere. And lastly, this is just a blog that we produced last year that set out how we were allowing all of our employees to decide for themselves in consultation with the business, but primarily from their own desires, needs, wants and requirements, to set their own work style up. So if somebody wants to be in the office most of the time, they can have a desk, we'll set them up. If they want to be hybrid, they are welcome in the office whenever they like. And if they want to be fully remote and have no obligation to ever come into a Zoom office, they are allowed to as well. And that's how we have done things at Zoom. And so we've taken our experiences as a company, as an employer, and our interface with our customers that are speaking to us all the time about how they set themselves up for success. And we've realized that those three principles of purpose, purposeful interactions, meaningful interactions, care, and flexibility really are key to success in this era of flexibility. Thanks very much for listening. Do pop questions in the side. I'm going to hand over to Matt now for the second part of the presentation, but we'll, you might well see me in questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. We do actually have a question in the chat as we speak. Question about how do we at Zoom create meaningful interactions? I'll give my view on that as one of the UK Zoomies, as we refer to ourselves. And it's really just about being intentional. So we all have flexibility. Some of my colleagues, they go to our London office, they go there most days of the week because it's convenient for them. For me, it's about a 2-hour commute to get there. So I'll only go there when there's an actual benefit to me being in the office, either to me personally or to the people that I work with. And it's just making sure that we provide the clarity when we're inviting people to come and meet with us. internally or with our partners and customers, provide that clarity about what's the intention, what's the intended outcome for meeting. And if somebody says that they love to join, but they can't do it, they're going to have to do that remote, then obviously at Zoom, we're fortunate we have the capability of making that hybrid session as well. But there are times when video is great, but actually having that in the room interaction, talking in person, having the conversation at the water cooler, at the coffee machine, you get a lot of benefit to that as well. But it's just providing that clarity is what we found. Drew, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
I think that's right, especially for someone like yourself, Matt, that comes in, not even a majority of the time. But if your organisation is, thinking about, Nicholas Bloom, who I mentioned earlier, says that the most common work style is that kind of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday intentional time. What you don't want to have is that your team are all just coming in and sitting on Zoom calls while they're in the office because one or two of the team, is fully remote or in another country or whatever. That is just not a good use of the people that you are requiring to come in's time. At Zoom, we have no meetings Wednesdays. So if we were in the office on Wednesdays, if you were an organization that had a no meeting Wednesdays policy like us, then you could really use that time that is not spent on Zoom calls or Teams calls or whatever to have lunch and learn sessions, have outside speakers come in, maybe have people finish a bit earlier so that you can have an internal networking, get to know you session by freeing up time in the calendar so that people aren't just having meetings on a day. There's much more time to have internal networking, internal training, internal relationship building, but also builds trust and builds affinity between employers and their employees. So just really making sure that you're not just choosing a couple of days and saying that's when you're in and that's when you're not. It's about thinking about what are your employees' experiences on those days.
Thanks, Drew. Another question that's come in around, there's been lots of anecdotal evidence around the equity that you get from having virtual meetings, but how can you actively measure that? And certainly, how do we do that at Zoom as part of our care process that we have? The equity, I mean, it's real. So Drew mentioned somebody doing the school run. It's a massive benefit to me. I can do the school runs, mornings, afternoons, whatever one I need to be doing. But then historically, many years ago, I broke my arm. So I couldn't travel to the office. It was before the advent of video conferencing. So I was missing out because of that temporary disability that I had. I couldn't travel. So I was left out. The video capability, the virtual, the hybrid meetings would have meant, if that had been available, that I could have carried on joining in. How you measure that, though, is quite difficult. The way we do that at Zoom, it's super basic, it's super simple. We ask people. We have a recurring survey that we do as part of the care at Zoom that we answer quarterly, I think it is, that we do it. But also we just have open feedback loops. We're quite fortunate, Zoom, global brand, pretty much everybody's heard of us, but we're still quite a small organization, circa 6,000 people globally at the moment. So quite a flat organizational structure. So actually, if we thought something was super important, either Drew or myself, we could drop a note to Eric, the CEO, founder of Zoom, and know that we'd be listened to. Not always the case in every organization, but that's how we do it. It simply is just about having that feedback loop, talking to people, and just seeing what's working. I'd love to say there's a technology solution, but I'm not sure there is.
I think organizations that really think about how they use their space, which is something Zoom can help with, and Matt might talk to. But have you set up your meeting rooms in such a way that they have the right technology? For example, we work with some of our partners that create cameras and screens, etc., that to make them run on something called Zoom Smart Gallery. So Smart Gallery, if you've all been on a Zoom call where if everybody was remote, you'd all have your own screen. Well, what happens if 4 of the people are in a meeting room. You know, if your organization hasn't thought about the technology, you probably have one camera in the meeting room, not really looking at anyone particularly in focus, because you're trying to look at all of them. And then someone ends up talking off camera, and it's just not as good an experience. Well, Smart Gallery uses AI and uses 2 cameras to give each person in the room their own screen on the screen. So every single person, so there's 8 people, 4 remote, 4 in the room, has their own screen on the Zoom call, giving them equity and that kind of equality of experience, so that there's not a different hierarchy between those in the room and those out the room. And it's just, these solutions do exist, and we're thinking all the time about how we can ensure there is that kind of equity between the remote experience and people that do want to go into the office for reasons that work for them.
Thanks, Drew. Thanks for those questions. If you've got any more, please put them in. We'll try and handle them. I'll speak a bit quicker on the bit I was going to do, because we've now got the last 20 minutes. So I always like to start with the Zoom wheel. This is our Zoom product wheel. Just to reset the expectation of what Zoom is and what we do. Everybody, of course, knows us for video meetings. Everybody's used us for video meetings, but we do a lot more as well. So what we have within our product wheel, we've got the meetings at the top there. We refer to that bundle as Zoom One. So that's now including things like webinars, Zoom events. We've got email and calendar integration into the Zoom client now as well. Now, that's not us providing you email and calendar services. That's linking into Office 365, linking into Google if you're using Google Workspaces, but bringing that capability into the Zoom client so I can just stay in the context that I'm trying to work in. We do provide, we'll be providing mail and calendaring services. It's going to be quite niche, very secure type services. But then we've got the room systems as well. We've had that for a number of years, which includes digital signage. It includes workspace reservations, and I'll talk about that in a little while. We've got Zoom Phone. We've had that since 2019. We've now just launched Contact Center as well. And our Zoom IQ, which is where we're bringing the AI in, which is doing the analytics of the meetings that you've got. And then it's also powering the virtual agent that we have for our contact centers and phone. And you could use it separate from Zoom as well. But again, I'll talk about that in a little while. And then underpinning all of that, we have our SDKs and APIs availability, because we're very much about bringing Zoom into the experiences for your staff and your customers, rather than trying to bring them into our platform. And I'll talk about some use cases of where we use that. But the other topic that I always have to start off with is security. The reason being, there's always lots of objections. There's a lot of misconceptions and noise within the media at the start of the pandemic. There were some challenges. Zoom had to scale super quickly because of COVID. And the interactions we've had with our customers before were very direct, very personal meetings. So as people were adopting Zoom, they got a lot of hand-holding and setting up. We were not intended to be a consumer platform at the time. So a lot of the capabilities that we had around security were off by default, because we'd work with our customers to choose the right configurations for them. And so what we found at the start of the pandemic is that consumers, normal people, they'd never had to worry about enterprise-grade security before, or Zoom bombing is the term that we don't really like because it applies to any video meeting. So we had some things to address. What I like to reassure people is that we have the enterprise level security that you need. So we've got the end-to-end encryption. Well, everything is encrypted by default for at rest and in transit. You can turn on end-to-end if you want. It's not a premium feature you've got to pay extra for, it's just included. You can integrate into your normal IDP for identity protection, so for single sign-on, so you get a seamless user experience for your staff. Data routing as well. You choose where it routes. You can turn off data. We've got global data centers. You can turn off the ones you don't want to use. And China is turned off by default for every customer. You have to opt in to use our Chinese data centers, unless you're a Chinese customer buying in China, in which case you have to opt in to use anything outside of China. Audio signatures and watermark on screenshots. So again, if you've got some data leaks coming from your organization, you're having on the Zoom meeting, you can track, you know who it was, you can find out from who leaked it. All of that included as standard, not a premium feature you have to pay extra for. But this isn't just us talking about it. We have the relevant compliance certificates as well. I'm not going to go through all these in detail. We've got ISO 27001 SOC Type 2, HITRUST, Cyber Essentials Plus, all the sorts of certifications that UK public sector is looking for, we have them. If you need more details, we're more than happy to share that. Sometimes you'll have to put a non-disclosure agreement in place, but super simple to do. So we can always go into more detail on that. So I just saw there was another question come in. I will talk about that, but let me at a different point, because it actually flows quite nicely with one of the later slides. So I'll come back to how organizations are interacting with consumers. So I'm going to move on from security. I say everybody knows about Zoom meetings. I don't really talk about it, but I'm going to start with talking about Zoom meetings. Not in detail. I'm sure you've all been on one, you've all used one, so you know you can use it at home, in the office, you can use it anywhere. Some of the examples we've had, though, are really quite interesting. So UK Parliament, they adopted Zoom for House of Commons, House of Lords during COVID so that they could carry on with the business of Parliament and running the country. And I think this was really brought to the fore when they had the address from President Zelensky from Ukraine, talking to House of Commons. They were using Zoom for that, and they used the interpreter feature we had so that everybody could understand what President Zelensky was saying. Again, it's a standard feature within Zoom. It's available to all of our customers. What we've had since then is we've added real-time translation and transcription. So you wouldn't have needed an interpreter. You'd have had the subtitles coming up on the screen, and it would automatically translate it from the Ukraine to English. So we're having a lot of interest from that for interacting with citizens where English isn't their first language. The transcription we have, it's now having speaker attribution, automated summary of the meeting you've got, the next steps that you've agreed in your meeting. And if you've recorded the meeting, it will then split that into smart chapters for you as well. So simplifying and reducing the workload for your staff from taking notes in the meetings, what to do next, what should I be doing? One of the lovely use cases of Zoom meetings that I love was Great Ormond Street Hospital. And again, during the pandemic, it was plans they'd been looking at it already, but they accelerated it. And they now talk about how they built the hospital without walls during COVID. And this meant that not every child that was ill had to go into the hospital to be away from friends and family. They could be treated at home because they could have that clinical conversation. And they're able to do that because Zoom had been integrated into the Epic patient record system that Great Ormond Street use. So again, the clinicians were working in the context that they need to, having all of their patient notes that they're available to. They were just then initiating or joining the Zoom meeting, but didn't really know it was a Zoom meeting because it's just staying where they were. Northern Ireland Prison Service were also using Zoom meetings. They introduced virtual visits during the pandemic. So the prisoners could still maintain that contact with friends and family, but they didn't then have to worry about the threat of the spread of the infection. And they've continued to use that because, as you can imagine, it reduces the security risk of people going into prisons and also means that people aren't having to travel. 3/4 of the NHS acute trusts are now using Zoom for patient consultations as well. Not all of those are integrated into the patient record systems, but everybody is using it. And the reason that happens is because people know Zoom. They're comfortable with Zoom. They used it a lot in the pandemic. They had lots of friends and family conversations. They had quizzes after work. They had quizzes with family. So now when you're in a high stress situation, perhaps having a medical diagnosis, or perhaps it's in adult social care where someone needs help, doing that on a platform that you know and you trust is much more reassuring than doing it on a brand new platform that you've never heard of. I'm going to move on from meetings and start talking about the Zoom Room platform that we have. As you can imagine, it's a room system. It will scale for the different types of rooms, workspaces that you might have, be that little huddle spaces, breakout spaces, large meeting rooms, boardrooms, whatever you absolutely need. It includes the room controls for the outside. It includes digital signage as well. So you can have as much digital signage across your estate that you want for broadcasting information out, be that to your staff, or in the context of a local authority. It's if you're in a council waiting room or in a library, you could have local residents information, each one managed separately, but all covered from the same admin console. One of the things that's really valuable to us, though, is the fact that we're an open platform. We don't want to be tying people down saying you've brought a Zoom Room system, so now you're only going to be using Zoom for your meetings. So our platform is open. You can natively join, obviously, a Zoom meeting from our Room system, but also Teams, WebEx, Google Meet, and you don't need any other third-party interrupt to enable that to happen. But one of the innovations that we had was a virtual receptionist. So you can take a Zoom Room system and turn it into a kiosk. And again, this was used in a pandemic for reducing high contact areas. So you would have a cost-effective device on a desk. A resident, customer, citizen would come in. You could click the button and that would connect you through to a receptionist. Receptionists could be in a building, they could be anywhere else in the world. And you could have that interaction and then you could verify your identity and then you'd be allowed into the buildings. But there's a charity that provides advice to citizens, and in Sheffield, they use this in a kind of unique and innovative way. They took the kiosks and they deployed them out into community spaces, so libraries, doctor surgeries, various places across the city, because they realized that there's a massive digital divide. Not all of the people they need to help have a device. They perhaps don't have a broadband connection. They might have mobility issues as well, so can't get to the local citizens advice office, but they could get to the local library, wherever was close to them. And so people are now able to go to these devices, click on the screen, they're connected through to citizens advice, and they're getting the help that they need. But it's proved so popular, they're now struggling to cope with that. So they've now taken up the Zoom Contact Center to help manage the call flows from these devices, and then also get the reporting off it as well. I'm just going to remind myself of the question that came in. Which will give me more about contact center. I thought it was relevant to this one, but it's not. It's more on the contact center. So I'm going to move on from Zoom Room and talk about Zoom Phone. So Zoom Phone we released in 2019. Still, lots of people don't know that we have a telephony platform. But not only we released it in 2019, we've now just announced that we've got over 5 million Zoom Phone customers, Zoom Phone users, which makes us the fastest cloud phone platform to 5 million ever. So we're the fastest growing. We have all the capabilities you need, and it's based on the same platform as Zoom Meetings. So you get the same quality, same reliability that you're used to. We have a lot of organizations talking to us now about using us as a business continuity because we integrate into the Teams platform. So your staff will have the same Teams client that they want with a Zoom application in it for making phone calls. So if there's an outage with the Microsoft platform, as we saw just in January, you're not losing all of your communications. And there's a government agency called UK Research and Innovation who are doing exactly that. They're using Microsoft for their collaboration platform because it's very, very excellent at doing that. But they're using Zoom for the communication because it's giving that great experience for their staff, their customers, and their partners. And then building out from Zoom Phone, we have Zoom Contact Center. So that is a full omni-channel contact center. So obviously it can provide voice. It's optimized for video, as you would expect from a Zoom service. But we've also got email coming into that. And this is where the interaction with social media. So we're adding in social media channels to this. So WhatsApp, Facebook, Twitter, as you can imagine, as a different opportunity for interacting with an authority, with a council, whatever your organization might be. We have our Zoom virtual agent as well. So this is where we're going to bring the machine learning and the AI into it to understand the intent of the citizens' conversation that they want to have. And that will then work across the chatbot that we've got today, the social media channels, whatever it might be. You build out the intent, you link it into your knowledge bases, and then you try and answer those and resolve those conversations at first. So all those, the high volume, low complexity stuff, automate it. You can divert it away, deflect it onto online channels that you've already got, your knowledge bases online. So then your agents are only going to be dealing with the low volume, the high complexity things where you really need to be talking to a person. And perhaps it's going to be in a housing situation. We have a housing authority that's taken Zoom Contact Center already. And it allows you to escalate from a chat to a voice to a video. So if someone's got something broken in the house, pipes leaking, boiler's broken, the citizen can actually show that to the agent rather than just trying to describe it. We're working with a couple of London boroughs at the moment, and they're blown away by the capability that we've got in our phone and contact center platform. But what really surprised them, we've identified savings of over £1 million over 3 years by moving telephony and contact center to Zoom. Because of the platform that we've got, we're able to offer these new capabilities at a much lower price point than what's normally available in the channel. And then finally, I want to talk about another use case, again, with hospitals, where they're looking at Zoom Contact Center to enhance their interactions. And they're looking at using Zoom Contact Center to provide conversations or virtual visits to the bedside. But rather than trying to set everybody up with a Zoom account and having to manage it, and it's a complexity for the patient, making it super simple so their friends, their family, whoever it might be, can just call in. Doesn't have to be by phone. It can, of course, just be from a website, from a Zoom client. Using the IVRs that we've got, you can check in to see the patient number, put in a unique code, and that will route the person through to the bedside device. And then the patient is able to have a meeting, conversation, a virtual dinner with their friends and family. So just bringing a bit of comfort back to the people that are unfortunately in hospital at the time. So those sorts of things that we're doing, we're seeing lots of different ways that our technology is being used, some of which has surprised us. The Kiosk device for bridging that digital divide was a great story, but lots of other opportunities out there as well. So that's everything that I wanted to cover. If there's any more questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and we can try and answer them now.
Beverly, thank you for your question as well. I know Matt did a good job of answering this. I'd like to just reiterate something I said earlier on, which was around that customer expectations having changed. Once our fellow citizens experience, a better way of receiving services, or whether that's from Amazon or from, the department for XYZ, it really does shape their view on how the more analog services are interacting with them. You never want to go back to being held on the phone for an hour again after having had your issue resolved effectively by a chatbot. You'll never want to try and deal with, if you're dealing with your local authority and they've just got some inbox which is very, very unresponsive and you've got no confidence in it. If you move to another county and they were using Zoom Contact Center and it was something that was, you felt that you were being dealt with quickly and effectively, from the comfort of an online portal with a virtual agent and the contact center, all of a sudden your view on what is should be standard will quickly change, and those that fail to adapt and embrace the latest technologies will pale by comparison, and that's true in any walk of life. And many of our private sector customers, obviously, they perhaps slightly different budgetary situations when it comes to innovation and whatnot. But I've seen telehealth apps which Zoom empower, and Zoom's the video function within those apps. Virtual doctor appointments that are just 10 years ahead of what with my the experiences that my family members have had trying to get an appointment with the NHS, in terms of how they manage appointments, how quickly and how low impact on the person who's receiving the appointment on their day and on their their mental health and etc. It's often that the sort of more that those expectations can be shaped by how an individual received a service from that private medical professional, ends up setting expectations in the public sector, rightly or wrongly. So all of the time we are interacting with companies all of the time, and increasingly I've seen another customer of ours, you're able to just WhatsApp the company. But this is something I didn't know existed until recently. But to your point around Facebook and social media, Beverly, you could just WhatsApp the chatbot that's within WhatsApp, and they will come back and give you the answers that you need. And so it's really quite fast moving. But the imperative is to try and keep up and to be aware of what new standards are and to try and meet them. We've got a few minutes left. I wondered if there was any other questions.
Doesn't look like it at the moment, but to everyone, you've got our names. You can find us on LinkedIn. Our names, followed out zoom.us if you want to email us. Please feel free to get in touch. We'd love to follow on the conversation if you've got any other questions. But for now, thank you for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for listening.